A gunslinger taunted an old cowboy, but never knew he'd awaken the most dangerous man in the West. The wind didn't howl. It whispered, dragging thin lines of dust across the open land like memories too old to name. The saloon doors creaked once, then stayed still, as if holding their breath, far beyond the main street, past the hitching post and the weathered church bell that hadn't rung in years. An old man sat by a water trough, sharpening a knife he hadn't used in a long time. Not because he needed it, but because the silence asked for something to do. He wore no badge, no spurs, no hint of who he once was. Just a brimmed hat low enough to hide the fire that hadn't gone out in his eyes. His boots were cracked like old promises, soles half swallowed by sand. People passed him without looking. That's how it was now. When time forgets you, so do men. Behind him, the town baked under a sun that never blinked. Nothing moved except the dust. Not even the clock in the sheriff's office. Not even the preacher's shadow. Just heat and silence. Then came the sound, not a gunshot, not a scream. Just the hollow clatter of hooves on the dry road, clean, cocky, too fast. The townsfolk turned their heads. From the north came a rider, young, tall in the saddle. Guns hung low on his hips, like invitations he didn't care who accepted. His horse kicked up the past with every step. The rider pulled up in front of the saloon. Dismounted like he owned the land. He spat in the dirt, looked around and laughed. "Ain't this where that old bastard lives?" He said to no one, loud enough for everyone. The townsfolk didn't answer, but their eyes betrayed them. All turned slowly. To the man by the trough, the old cowboy didn't move, didn't flinch, just kept sharpening. The sound of steel against stone was quieter than breath. The rider smirked. Well, well. He took a step forward, hand grazing the handle of his gun, not drawing it, just letting the weight be known. That's when the old man stopped. He didn't speak, didn't stand, just looked up, eyes steady, hollow with age, yet sharp as broken glass. In that moment, the town felt smaller. Even the sun dimmed, even the wind paused, and something deep, something buried long ago, shifted. The saloon went quiet when the young gunslinger walked in, boots sharp, voice louder than necessary. He tossed his coat toward a nearby chair, let it miss, and laughed like it didn't matter. The piano man stopped playing without being asked. No one told him to. Just instinct, the kind a town develops when something ugly enters, wearing a grin. Outside, the old man walked slowly to the hitching post. The crowd had shifted. Murmurs ran like snakes through alleys. No one spoke directly, but all eyes followed him. Inside, the gunslinger slapped the bar with a coin. "Whiskey. And make it too. And for the ghost I came to bury." The barkeep hesitated. The old cowboy walked past the swinging doors. He didn't pause, didn't look at anyone, just stepped in like a shadow, slipping through sunlight. Dust clung to him like memory. His coat barely moved. Only his eyes did, slow, calculating, unreadable. "Thought you'd be taller," the gunslinger said, raising his glass. No reply. The old man stopped a few feet away. He didn't sit, didn't drink, just watched. The gunslinger grinned wider. "They say you once rode with legends, took down men whose names still make sheriffs sweat. But now," he raised his arms, mocking, "now you're just a story kids tell each other to fall asleep. Silence, you hear me, old man?" He took a step closer. The air in the room got tighter. "You're nothing now, just bones held together by spite. Time's already beaten you. I'm just here to sweep up the rest." Still, the old man said nothing. His silence stung more than any words. The gunslinger's grin twitched. Not a smile anymore. "A crack. I came to bury you, not respect you," he said quieter. The crowd watched. No one moved. They all waited. But for what, they didn't know. The barkeep looked away. The deputy scratched his neck but didn't dare speak. Even the dog tied outside whimpered low. The young man stepped close. Too close, and that's when a voice came. Soft, raspy, not from the old man, but from the back corner. "I wouldn't." All heads turned. From the shadows stepped a woman, silver hair tucked behind her ears. A scar down her cheek like a map to some place no one wanted to go. She leaned on a cane but stood like she didn't need it. "He's not dead," she said. "He's waiting," the gunslinger scoffed. "And who are you, his nurse?" "No," she said. I'm the reason he stopped. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The gunslinger looked from her to the old man, and in that silence something shifted, not in the room, but in the air. The old man hadn't moved, but now it felt like the whole town had. He adjusted his hat, just slightly, and with that the storm began. She didn't follow him when he walked out. She waited until the town's eyes drifted elsewhere, until whispers softened behind doors, until the sun dipped low enough to pull shadows long. Then she moved. The old cowboy had settled on the bench beside the livery. Same place he always did when he had nowhere to be, back straight, eyes on the dirt, like he was watching years go by instead of people. She approached without sound. He didn't look at her, but he knew. You shouldn't have spoken, he said, voice dry as gravel. I didn't speak for you, she replied. I spoke for what's left of this town's spine. Silence, the wind rolled through. Shifting her coat, he finally glanced sideways, just enough to register her cane. The way her left leg dragged half a second late. You limp, he muttered, and you hide. Their eyes met. Wounded doesn't always recognize wounded, but this time they did. That night she found him behind the old barn, lantern barely flickering, saddle leather in his lap, his hands moving slow, not to fix it, just to feel something worn that hadn't betrayed him. She set a tin plate near his foot. Beans, bread, and half a boiled egg. He didn't thank her, didn't touch it, she didn't ask him to. Days passed, they didn't talk much, but she started showing up. One morning, she stood by the fence mending wire. Her hands shook slightly. He watched from the porch, didn't offer help, but by mid-afternoon, the wire was tight, and his canteen rested near her elbow. No words, just cold water. Trust didn't come fast, but it came. In the shared rhythm of small tasks, stacking wood, patching holes, sweeping dust no one would walk through again. They moved like two ghosts rebuilding a house meant for the living. One dusk, a dog barked, wild one, limping, snarling near the chicken coop. She froze, her cane slipping. He didn't think. He moved. Quick, like instinct still lived where pride had faded. He didn't shoot the dog, just threw a boot, hard enough to send it yelping into the brush. She sat in the dirt. Breath shaking, he offered his hand. First time, she took it. Their grip was brief, rough. Steady, real. That night, over a quiet fire and cracked tin cups, she spoke. You stopped being who you were, she said. He nodded. I had to. She stared into the flames. I know what that costs. He didn't. Ask didn't need to. They both carried things that didn't need retelling. But that night, when she fell asleep on the chair beside him, her head tilted slightly. Face soft in firelight, he placed his coat over her shoulders, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of something other than regret. The cabin stood at the edge of the old trail, half sunk in the earth, its wood silvered with time. No lock on the door, no name on the mailbox, just a roof that didn't leak, and walls that kept the wind at arm's length. They didn't call it home, but they returned to it every evening, like it was the only place that didn't demand explanations. The stove was stubborn. She lit it each morning, muttering beneath her breath. He never offered to help, but each day when she went to fetch water, she'd return to find the fire already lit, coals low, pot warming. A tin cup beside it turned face up. She cooked with focus, small meals. Careful portions, no waste. He mended the fence out back, fixed the broken hinge on the door, rethreaded the oil lamp's wick. Neither asked the other for anything, but nothing was left undone. One evening, her hands slipped while slicing a potato. She didn't cry out, just sucked in air, pressing cloth to her palm. He appeared beside her without sound, took her hand gently, washed it, wrapped it. The whole time his eyes never met hers, but his hands were steady, tender. When he was done, she whispered, "Thank you." He only nodded and left the room. He repaired an old rocking chair next, sanded it down slow, like smoothing a past too jagged to sit on. She watched from the window, silent, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. That night, she sat in that chair and rocked without speaking, and for the first time, her breath came easy. They worked in rhythm, not side by side, But in Echo, he chopped wood. She stacked it. She cleaned the rifle. He cleaned the boots. One night, rain came, hard and sudden. The wind howled like a wounded beast. They didn't speak, just sat by the fire, her cane resting against the wall, his hat on the table, both of them staring into orange and gold, as if it held the past they hadn't yet shared. A week passed, then two. Still, no questions, but understanding bloomed in the quiet, like wildflowers through cracks in dry land. He noticed how she winced each morning, how her legs stiffened in cold. She noticed how he paused near the photo on the shelf, a younger man in uniform, a woman with his eyes. He never touched it, but his silence around it grew louder each day. One afternoon, he handed her a small carved box. Didn't say where it came from. She opened it. Inside, buttons, thread, a thimble. Old things that once belonged to someone who mended for a living. She looked up. He shrugged. "Figured you so." She smiled, and just a flicker, like sun between clouds. That was kind. He didn't answer, but he stayed in the room a little longer that evening. They never called each other by name, never said what hurt them, but when the wind knocked a shutter loose one night, both of them rose at once, tools in hand, shoulders side by side in the storm. When it was fixed and the rain eased, he looked at her, really looked, and she nodded. That was all. Mutual respect, built without words, earned through dust, firewood, bandages, and silence. It started with hoofbeats, not the wild, careless kind that echo with arrogance, but measured, deliberate, too many to count. The kind that don't ask permission, just arrive, dust lifted from the trail like smoke rising from something long dead. She was on the porch, eyes narrowed. He stood behind her, shoulders still. They both knew the boy had returned, but not alone this time. 6 riders, each dressed in dust and steel. The young gunslinger rode at the front, chin high, pistol polished, as if trying to shine over the fear in his own shadow. He pulled his horse hard at the gate. Didn't smile this time. "Thought maybe you were dead," he said. Louder than needed. The old man said nothing. He didn't step down, didn't retreat, just leaned against the post. Like the land itself held him up. The others dismounted, spreading like oil across dry ground. One of them, a lawman by badge only, hired muscle by trade, spat near the porch. "You harboring him?" he asked the woman. She met his stare. "No one's hiding," she said. "Just living," the deputy scoffed. "That's the same thing these days." The gunslinger stepped forward. "This is your last warning, old man. You walk away now, and we forget this ever happened." The old man's jaw tightened, a flicker, the sound of a hawk overhead. He didn't move, didn't answer. The woman took a slow breath, her hand resting on the railing, fingers trembling just enough to betray what her face refused to show. Inside, on the table, lay a rifle, untouched, loaded, within reach. She knew it, he knew it, but no one moved. One of the riders stepped forward. "This is about land," he said. "Old pride, old grudges. Ain't worth the blood." The cowboy finally blinked. Not fear, calculation. He glanced to the woman. She gave no signal, but her silence steadied him. Then he stepped off the porch. Slowly, boots hitting the dirt with the weight of decades. He walked past the riders, past the gunslinger, past all their noise, toward the old tree by the road. There, he knelt and dug his hand into the soil. Pulled up something small, a rusted horseshoe. Bent, forgotten, he looked at it for a long time, then stood, walked, back to the porch, and hung it on the door, not as a threat, not as a warning, but as a line, a marker, a memory. The gunslinger watched. Something in him faltered, not in his stance, but in his breath. He looked to his men. They weren't smirking anymore. The tension broke, not with a shot, but with absence. The cowboy turned his back on them, not in fear, but in dismissal, and that was worse than any bullet. Minutes passed. The riders didn't draw, didn't speak. Eventually, one by one, they mounted again. The lawman shook his head, muttered something no one heard, and turned south. The gunslinger stayed the longest, eyes locked with the old man's back. Then, finally, he spat in the dirt, not with pride, but with shame, and followed the others. When the dust cleared, the woman stepped down beside him. "You didn't reach for the gun," she said. He nodded. "Didn't need to." She looked toward the tree. "Why that horseshoe?" "Because it was bent," he said, quiet. But it still held. The town didn't expect him to show up again, not after what happened at the cabin, but the old cowboy rode in just before dusk, not fast, not loud. Just steady, like the ticking of an old clock that never broke, only slowed. He tied his horse at the same post he used years ago, stepped onto the same wooden boards that once echoed under his boots when he wore a badge. Now, he wore only dust and time. The saloon was full. Word had spread. The young gunslinger was back in town. This time drinking like he owned it. This time daring anyone to challenge what he hadn't earned. The old man entered without announcement. The piano went quiet. Glasses stilled mid-air. The air tightened. The gunslinger turned, a half-smile tugging at his mouth, but his eyes didn't shine the same. "I figured you'd crawl back," he said. Loud enough for all to hear. The cowboy didn't answer. He walked to the center of the room, where the floorboards creaked just enough to whisper old truths. He stopped. Not a hand near his belt, not a challenge in his posture, just presence, unshakable, unspoken. The gunslinger stepped forward, cocky still, but slower. "Don't mistake what happened at that cabin. You got lucky. That's all." Silence. The cowboy's eyes met his, in calm, hollow. "Endless." The young man shifted. "Say something," he snapped. But the old man didn't speak. He turned his head, just slightly, to look at the townsfolk, the same ones who once cheered him, then forgot him, then watched him fade. He scanned the room, slow, eyes falling on faces that had chosen silence too many times. Then finally, his voice came, low, worn but clear. "You're not the danger," he said. "You're the echo." The gunslinger frowned. "What does that mean?" The old man stepped 1 foot forward. "Close now, close enough to hear breath. To fight you," he whispered, "would be to fight nothing." The saloon held its breath. The gunslinger's jaw twitched. He reached for his gun, too fast. Too loud, too desperate. But before leather met steel, the barkeep shouted. No, it wasn't defiance, it was fear, real fear, of what the old man would do if forced, of what silence would awaken if broken. The gunslinger froze, then slowly lowered his hand, not because he chose Duda, but because he saw something in the old man's stillness, in the way no one else moved. A weight that couldn't be lifted by speed or noise. The woman appeared then, at the door, eyes calm, face pale but steady. She didn't speak either, just looked at the cowboy and nodded once. That was enough. The gunslinger looked between them. The silence, the scars, the patience. Then, with a sneer he couldn't hold long, he turned, walked out, fast. The doors flapped behind him like regret trying to speak. The cowboy didn't follow, didn't claim victory. He just walked to the bar, placed 2 coins down and said, "For the mess," then turned to go. Before he reached the door, a voice from the crowd asked, "Why didn't you shoot him?" He paused, looked back once. "Because he wanted me to." Winter came late that year. Snow drifted soft across the hills, covering what the dust had left behind. The cabin stood quiet, windows fogged from warmth inside. Smoke curling gentle from the chimney like the breath of something finally at peace. He sat on the porch, not guarding it, just watching. The chair creaked beneath him, slow and familiar. His boots rested loose, had tilted back enough to feel the pale sun on his brow. No pistol at his side. Just coffee and silence. Inside, she moved about the kitchen. No limp today. Or maybe she just hid it better. She didn't ask where he'd been that day at the saloon. Didn't need to. He'd come back with dust on his coat, and nothing in his eyes that needed explaining. They had fallen into a rhythm, not as lovers, not as saviors, just 2 people who had stood their ground when the world wanted them buried. The fire crackled behind her. The porch creaked beneath him. Outside, a young bird fluttered near the edge of the fence, wings too small for the wind. He stood, walked over and lifted it gently, set it inside an old crate. Lined with cloth and warmth, she watched him through the window and said nothing, but her eyes smiled. Seasons shifted, the snow melted, trees budded green again. Children returned to play where once only echoes had lived. He taught one of them how to ride, showed another how to clean a saddle. He never raised his voice, didn't need to. People listen now, not out of fear, but out of something heavier. Respect. One day he placed the horseshoe back in the soil, didn't bury it, just laid it down, bent metal. Rusted edges. Still whole, she asked softly, why now? He looked out across the open land, sky wide, sun low, because things grow here again. At night they'd sit side by side, the lantern flickering low. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't, but every silence felt earned, every breath a kind of freedom. And one dawn, as mist curled through the fields and light kissed the roof in gold, he stepped out onto the porch, alone, closed his eyes and exhaled. Not pain, not regret, just air, light and clean, a man who had once carried the West on his shoulders, now only carried himself. And the wind moved on, carrying no names, just the weight of what was finally forgiven.